So I started to drink my own urine and I aged it and was mainly I was using the aged urine topically. I just gave up on it because it was too freaking disgusting. In the forums, you read these, people are like, oh, we're just conditioned to think it's disgusting. It's just society's conditioning. And I'm like, no, go to the toilet where pee has been sitting for a few days, give it a
Yeah.
big sniff, and tell me that is not just truly like, you don't need to be societally conditioned to understand it's disgusting.
Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing. Hi, and welcome to Influence to Death. My name is Victoria Lafont, and I am here, thankfully, again with guest co-host Amanda Jones. And today we are going to talk about urine therapy, which we have Google Docs where we gather all of our references for episodes. And this one we titled Piss Drinkers! Exclamation point.
Can you guess our bias at all by that? But
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting conversation. I've done a lot of weird shit in the name of health. I think we've talked about this. I ate a ton of raw food I'm fine, I guess. Raw meat. I've done leech therapy. Um, fasted for maybe a little longer than was probably healthy for my female body. I'm trying to think all these different things that I've done.
let's not forget our cod liver lotion. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually connected over that. We have weird overlaps in our. I thought about the cod liver thing a lot researching for this because some people who do urine therapy, they're really into fermenting it. Ferment. People use that word, and I'm like, fermentation's like a controlled rot, right? And there's certain bacteria that yeah, and it's for carbohydrates mainly. So I don't know if fermentation is the right word. I think what you mean is rancid. Anyway, I thought about that because of the controversy with the cod liver oil, the fermented versus non-fermented cod liver oil that totally exploded, the Weston A. Price Foundation a few years ago. But yeah, Amanda and I connected because I used to sell it. Was it because you sold it or because you bought it and then you were just like, wow, it would come in a liter?
Yeah, I came across a bunch of extra surplus somehow. I just ended up with way more and it was coming up on expiry and I was just like, I cannot let this go to waste. I'm sure it will be great as lotion.
Yeah, we both submerged ourselves essentially, and mine was definitely fermented. And I remember my partner at the time coming over and being like, what unholy hell have you unleashed on this apartment?
The thing that cracks me up about that stuff too is I was doing so much of this insanity when I was in my 20s and what was that really wrong with me anyway? I look back, I'm like, girl,
Nothing.
you looked fine. You weren't so, eaten up with wrinkles that you really it would have been worth bathing in cod liver for. What were you even doing?
And meanwhile, the actual use of cod liver, it's the tiniest amounts. When people were eating actual cod livers, it was this tiny little, and we have I remember the tubs. I can't remember. It was a liter and a half tub. And I would just take it and stand in the bath and just coat myself.
Okay. So wait, but were you going to say that out of everything you've done, you've not yet?
I've never done urine therapy, and we're kind of just starting. Let's just start with our bias. This is fun. Hannah is so thoughtful. She's been thoughtful, I think, her whole life. And you and I are way more rogue. We tried a lot of shit in our early days. I would still try a lot of shit if I was around the right people. I'm sure I'd be like, let's do it. I just happen to be with my husband, who's incredibly balanced like Hannah is. But when I talk to you sometimes, I'm like, yeah, I can totally let out these insane stories, because you have also kind of let yourself go there a little bit. So yeah, for me, it's because I was around people that were doing urine therapy, and it was the way that they were doing it was so gross. I couldn't go there. And I'm sure people are listening and they're like, leeches are gross too, you psychopath.
Yeah, well, it's funny, that whole episode where Hannah was literally about to gag talking about leeches, I could get cozy with a leech, way sooner than I
Relative
would
to
than
pee?
drinking nine-month-old pee, which I've done, I'll say, but it's just not.
So you did it. What was the, like
Oh, okay, so it's just simple. This was a time in my life where narrative fed my thinking. It was
Mhm,
before I ever learned to ask, like, how we know what we know and, like, what the mechanism would be, or, has anybody had a controlled experiment around this? If so, what did it show us? Like,
mhm.
none of that was there yet. I was just gleefully exploring the universe of all things theology, just like embodied physiology, right? I wasn't
Yeah.
doing this in the hard textbook. I wasn't into hard science yet,
Mhm,
but I was clearly fascinated with the human body, with food, with the natural world. And
mhm.
so it was such a fun time.
Yeah.
It's so fun to not be encumbered by the
Critical thinking?
pursuit of evidence or critical thinking. It is so fun, and it's like that's narrative drives that space.
Yeah.
So, and as humans, we are so driven by narrative and storytelling. That's really where we've
Mhm,
come from for millennia. I mean, I think we
mhm,
also innately have some of the scientific method kind of built into us, or else we wouldn't have come as far as we have. This
mhm.
idea of like, let's set up a experiment, let's observe outcomes. There
So
it is in there, but
just as an aside, so I read Story of the Human Body by he's the Harvard researcher. He put the pigs on the treadmills. We have to look up his name. I'll put it in the show notes. I just can't remember
yeah,
his
that's
name right
fine.
now. There's actually a great, I think it's a Radio Lab episode that talks about this researcher at Harvard like hearing like hoof beats. And he was like, what are those hoof beats? And he like goes down the hall to this guy's office and he has literal pigs, like pigs on treadmills watching them run. Anyway, he wrote this book called The Story of the Human Body. And in this book, Amanda, they talk about how like the first scientific experiments were in humans trying to kind of like figure out like how to get food the best, like the best way to
Yeah.
get calories. And so it's like they would essentially, I mean, they didn't know, it wasn't like they were like in their primordial lab, like setting this up, but it was like they would kind of run these experiments about like, what if we like approached hunting from this direction, or like we did this certain technique with, like the tubers that we were gathering, whatever. So to your point, like there is maybe some of that that is in us because we had to have it to survive. But
Exactly,
also, yeah, there's,
exactly. Yeah, but and at the same time for me at that time of my life, it was just this really exciting, fun time of experimentation and being really open to whatever I came across. And I'd been backpacking in South America and Mexico, and I'd picked up a, like, contagious skin fungus.
mhm.
And I was back home and trying to treat it on my own, and it was kind of this, like, shifting. I remember then there was, like, kind of a colloquial name for it down in Mexico. It's called shifting.
Is it Helirut?
No, no, but
It's not that. Okay.
it was called shifting clouds is what they would like, the translation, what they
Okay.
call it.
I'm
I
gonna
never
Google this and
really
figure it
I
out.
never really got, like, a actual cultured diagnosis of it, but it would kinda shift around my body. It would, like, crop up over on one, part,
Amanda,
move it around.
totally Helirut. It's tinea versicolor.
Well, so I don't know, maybe. I've seen Holly Rot and that
Looks
patchy
different.
looks different. Yeah, this was more
Okay.
like these, like, kinda red patches that would come up and then drop down, and so I started getting into reading about treating this naturally, and I got into all these wormholes. It really kind of freaked me out because, you start imagining these, like, fungal bodies moving through around in your body, and I was trying everything, and I came across urine therapy. So I started to drink my own urine, and I aged it, and was mainly I was using the aged urine topically.
Mhm.
Um, never I just gave up on it because it was too freaking disgusting.
Nobody would
And
have sex with you?
in the forums, you read these, people are like, "Oh, we're just conditioned to think it's disgusting. It's just society's conditioning." And I'm like, "No, go to the toilet where pee has been sitting for a few days, give it a big
Yeah.
sniff, and tell me that is not just truly, like, you don't need to be, like, societally conditioned to understand it's disgusting.
Yeah.
It, um now maybe something you can, like, override that reflex with time if you're just constantly drinking your urine, but for me, it didn't happen, so I quit. But so that, that informs my bias. Listen, I think it's one of those areas where there are literally, well, let me go back quickly to the power of narrative. I think that I
Yeah.
had heard on a podcast somewhere
Like this one.
that that French soul, or this was probably back where I was like, you had to boot up the podcast on a laptop computer and, like stream it from somebody's
Download it onto your
website. Yeah.
iPod or something.
Yes. And it was about how the French soldiers had to survive. It was like, I don't, in my head, this story was like French soldiers somewhere in history had to survive for a long time out in the middle of nowhere. And so they drank their piss. And then they realized that it made them all so much stronger and cured all their illnesses, incidentally. And so that was, to me, it was like, yeah,
Okay.
that's amazing.
That was good
That's
enough.
amazing. So I remember telling people that, oh, yes, it's, historical. This is what, without ever like looking at like, where was this? And what got better and why, how long did they do this? And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
anyway, and certainly there are stories throughout the world of people surviving by drinking their urine, but that doesn't mean that it's like a first line therapeutic approach. It means that it might be something to consider if you're stuck between a
Stuck.
rock and a hard place in the
Literally, yeah.
desert for a couple of weeks. But it is one of those deals where we're looking up. I was telling Victoria before this episode, like, I need to rein in my bias here and actually really try to do the research on like what bioactive compounds might be in urine. And we're going to
Mhm.
get to that, like stem
Mhm.
cells, urea containing nitrogen and what that could do. There's different theories out there of like, there may be some bioactive component that we just don't understand yet how it's working, an tumor component or something that we can,
Maybe. Yeah.
capture. So there's always my desire to leave that room for the unknown,
Mhm.
but initially I have a pretty strong bias against it. And I
Mhm.
will also say that there's this when I was researching this, I came across some work from NASA. I don't know if you
Yeah,
saw
yes,
this.
I saw that where they really analyzed urine, like, extremely, specific
There
components
was,
that are in there.
yeah. So that's interesting that there was kind of this other industrial, like, purpose for, "Hey, we need to really study this and understand what is in this, what's useful, what's harmful, because 'cause we're gonna be out in outer space and we need to recycle every single scrap."
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like, man, if, like, this has been studied, this isn't just one of those, like, dumb modern science, they think it's waste and they don't have no idea and haven't looked at it. Like,
Mhm.
there has been eyes on urine and its bioactive components for many decades now,
Yeah.
and the fact that it hasn't been identified as a potential, a stronger potential therapeutic source, kind of makes me a little bit less, I'm the room that I'm holding for the unknown around urine therapy is kind of like shrinks and shrinks the more
Yeah.
that I read about it. And I also have a very strong bias against some of the marketing I see around it. So like if you go to these people that are
Urine
promoting
therapy
urine
guide for
therapy,
beginners. Did you see that? This
well,
morning I
or
sent it
just
to you on Instagram.
it'll be like every other kind of alternative health outside of the realm of evidence-based anything. Like there will just be you're just proximal to a lot of very woo-woo stuff that a lot of which I think can, actually has potential for harm,
Mhm.
that, I'm just like, when I get proximal to that and I start seeing these ads for certain products and certain classes and the way that it's just like this huge sales engine behind it, I
Mhm.
start to be like, oh, I'm in the zone again. I used to be in this zone. I've gotten out of that zone. I'm now kind of allergic to it. So
Mhm.
everything that surrounds it also like raises red flags for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of,
Cure
sort of
alls.
yeah, context around it that you can see it gets into the, like, follow these 5 steps, and steps 2, 3, 4, and 5 are links to my sales page. I also think though, I mean, I'll come back to this on this podcast. Everybody has to make money. That's part of the deal of living on this earth now. Some of the like objections that I've seen against it being used more as a therapeutic in conventional science is that it's free. Like there is no way for, let's say, like a pharmaceutical company to capitalize on it and, create a product. Although, when I think about it, I'm like, well, that's like the objection, right? That comes from like the people who are really into urine therapy is like, they're never going to recommend it. They,
Right. Well, and
the
we'll get to
they,
that in the stem cell conversation. It still would take massive amounts of
yeah, it's
pharmacological work to make it
to make it,
therapeutic.
yeah, clinically relevant. Um,
And
it's
they have. I mean, they have taken horse urine and made hormone replacement therapies that made a
totally,
lot of money. So I just
yeah,
don't know that that
yeah,
argument is
it's
actually
just like a
true.
common argument that you hear
Yeah.
from kind of the urine the piss drinking camp, as
Yeah.
we would say. I don't think my bias is as strong. I mean, I certainly don't love the smell of pee, right? Like, and I don't think that it's some like part of me that's been deconditioned or conditioned that I need to decondition. Like I'm a pretty deconditioned human in many, many ways. I don't like feel like, oh, is there some part of me that's just missing out on enjoying pee? Yeah, and I think the power of narrative, I mean, you nailed it. It's like, and it is fun to like completely explore without feeling responsible. The thing I think with pee or urine therapy, it's an interesting. They don't call it like pee therapy. It's like there's like some like technical word in urine, like urine therapy, um, that that comes up for me is it's like the only harm I can see is that you don't use a therapy that could be effective and that is proven effective because you're gonna like do the pee drinking thing instead, that you're like convinced of that. By
Well,
and large,
but if you're drinking a lot of it, there are very real harms.
it
I mean,
seems
kidney damage from excessive urea
yeah,
buildup, you can get all
yeah.
sorts of mineral electrolyte imbalances, you can get, there can be bacterial issues, you can remetabolize. I mean, we'll get to this in a minute too, but
Yeah,
you do excrete quite a bit of environmental pollutants in your urine that you're then
right. That's
recapturing. I mean, there's issues that could come if you're drinking a lot. Now, not everybody is recommending that you're, like, drinking all of your urine, some of it's a lot more reasonable, that it's, like,
in the
used
realm of drinking
periodically,
pee. It's yeah, it's
high.
reasonable.
Yeah, if it's, like, highly diluted and you're doing it as a protocol during a fast or something like that versus, like, I just drink, all my urine, and that's what lands people in the hospital. It's like, "Where what have you been doing anything abnormal today, sir? Your electrolytes are off the chart, and you have acute, like, kidney inflammation and gut inflammation." "Well, I have been drinking all of my piss." So you'll anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I can just feel it's like there's my voice just is not as strong for whatever reason. I'm like, you know what it is I think my fascination takes over with like the culture of it. So like if you go
Mhm.
on TikTok or you go on Instagram, it's kind of characterized by I see like these two different groups. There's either these guys that are like these big beardy, kind of attractive like hippie dudes, there's like some like
Strong
sexualness
like
there.
ox.
Yeah, and they're kind of older. It's like this older guy, like
Mhm.
gray hair, like that, but they look really vital and they are like totally into drinking the most like aged brown, they call it like their fermented pee, and they like the guy I sent you this morning was like he's like the final boss
Troy.
of those
Oof.
dudes and he's like what is it like the health nut, certified health nut or something. And he does have like he's using ManyChat, which is a software that you can use on Instagram or now TikTok where you comment urine and you get his free guide. He's like got his little like marketing funnel set up. So there's those people. And then I also see these women who are the kind of like woo woo, um,
More into the Vedic.
channeling,
Oh, yeah.
speaking in, whatever language is being channeled through them. And then like they're kind of like in that realm. And it totally reminds me of, and I know Amanda and I kind of come from the same like community, the same woo woo community where it's like I was living in Hawaii, and there's people that would talk to you about, like, the Mayan New Year and the calendar and the world ending and, like, the, like, energies and these concepts that, like you're saying, like, they sound really
Oh
interesting,
my
and
god. Yeah,
they're
well,
like
amniotic fluid is almost all urine, so that you've been
right.
drinking it since a baby, and now
Eh
you've been depriving yourself of this,
yeah, this whole
nectar
they
of
showed this, like,
nourishment.
MRI of the baby, in utero, and it's, like, opening its mouth and closing its mouth, and it's out there on social. So I think what we're trying to do is, I mean, as with all things, is give you a more balanced take, and for sure, yeah, over-consuming your pee is not a good idea. It's such I feel like words that come out of my mouth on this podcast, sometimes I'm just like,
Yeah,
"Oh my god." We're getting to the takeaway a little bit, but the main issue that I see is, like, somebody is desperate. They have cancer, they have, some type of disease that they feel really helpless. And then all of a sudden they find this on TikTok and they get sucked
yeah.
in to the exclusion of other therapies. But okay, let's go through the we do have a little bit of like a process. Let's start with the history. The history is do you want me to just start in here? Do you have
Yeah,
the history is actually really fascinating. I feel like every paper we've looked online, read online at actual research papers, but also just like what people are talking about online. It's sort of this misuse of this quote from the Bible. I think Amanda, like you said this, and I didn't see this as much of a connection, but this British naturopath, John Armstrong, is the one who kind of misappropriated this quote. It's from the book of Proverbs: drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. And so the people who are really into urine therapy, they use this as like, hey, as far back as the Bible, it's like in the Bible that you're supposed to do this. And he was the one who was like really into urine therapy, wrote a book about it, which we'll talk about. And this quote got really popular. But even before the Bible is like whatever 2000 years ago now, there is record of people using urine both as therapy, like direct therapy, and as in a way to analyze what was happening in the body way
yeah.
before the Bible. So I actually, for this episode, I tried to rope in the acupuncturist that I used to work with, who I adore, to come on. And she's just like, I'm doing my work in my herbal apothecary. She's doing great work up in Michigan, but she was like, hey, listen, there is actually in traditional Chinese medicine, like a very small mention of using urine therapy. And it's specific. It's like boys under a certain age, their urine that is put into a formula. So it's not used on its own
Uh-huh.
necessarily. It's my understanding. And then it's like from boys under I can't remember the age of like 12 or something or 10. And I actually also asked Dr. Tim Sharp because he has his doctor of Chinese medicine, and he was like, yeah, that's like the one application in traditional Chinese medicine. So it's kind of interesting to read in some of these papers where they're like urine therapy was used by like Pliny the Elder and Hippocrates and ancient Greece and Egypt. Like they talk
Uh-huh.
about this in these ancient cultures, and then they throw in like in traditional Chinese medicine, but it's like this like very tiny application that I am not a TCM. I've never studied that. And so I'm like, I don't even know why that would be. We didn't get into the deep mechanisms. But it is used traditionally. That's a
I
big
think
part of it.
I think maybe one of the logical threads that we could follow there if we were going to, which we don't need to, but is that one of the main actual solutes in urine, aside, there's water and then there's different like
Oh, water.
chemical solutes, right? Urea is the top solute,
Yeah.
I believe. That can become ammonia as it breaks down. And ammonia has, cleaning properties. It's like what grandmas used to clean for, but it also
Yeah.
has a lot of like kind of catalyst properties biochemically. So it could be that
Mm.
it's not even necessarily that the urine is the therapeutic so much as the ammonia inside of that urine is catalyzing a reaction inside the herbal formula that's making it more potent. So,
Maybe,
something like
yeah.
that could be
It's
happening.
in Ayurveda too. They talk about using urine in combination, like the papers that I looked at with this one particular Ayurvedic herb called gaduchi. like that was kind of the pairing. So yeah, I mean, Amanda, great guess. I have no idea, but I do think it's interesting that it's, at least in TCM, it's this very specific application, and then you read these papers and they just kind of throw in like Chinese medicine and it's like a little bit, a little bit. Um, so yeah, there is a traditional use, but it does seem like that proverb was, it's like, as with all things in any ancient book, it's like, what were they actually saying? Like in my mind, I'm like, maybe they were saying to drink running water instead of standing water.
Yeah.
It could
Or
have been like
to or
that
like
simple.
or to be, to build self-sufficiency. I mean, so drink water out of thine own cistern and running waters out of thine own well. That to me is kind of like, like don't be overly reliant on the king's aqueduct or whatever,
Who knows what the hell is going
Y
on? Yeah,
yeah.
it's totally. Do you want to talk about John Armstrong?
Well, yeah, so he's the one that kind of, like, picked up that Hebrew proverb and ran with it. So in 1944, he published this book called The Water of Life: A Treatise on Urine Therapy, and he had been using it. He had interpreted that biblical proverb as, suggesting that urine could be urine, and I think the urine therapy runs alongside water therapy, as you see it come up with water
Mhm,
fasting a lot, both in, this kind of more, Western tradition, but also in Eastern traditions and Vedic texts and stuff. They go together, water therapy and urine therapy.
mhm,
And so he published this book, The Water of Life, and then it really took I don't think it did that well in the Western world, but it was picked up in places like India and a lot of like Eastern cultures. And it was kind of, there was a resonance there with some of their ancient texts and kind of yogic traditions that were also looking at things like, what is it, Shivambu Kalpa? Is that I'm saying that?
mhm,
Shivambu Kalpa, the water of life, which is like the water of Shiva. And that it has, there's all these Vedic, practices in that lineage. And there's some mention there that, um, you could link to urine therapy, but it was so much of this similar to the Hebrew text, like, when you go and you read the actual
yeah,
text, it's not very explicit in terms of, like, "Hey, you should be aging your urine and drinking urine all the time," or anything like that. They're they're very more kind of like esoteric statements that require a lot of interpretation.
mhm,
And so you see that theme a lot where there's like one little seed and then that gets kind of like
yeah,
layered upon and extrapolated and expanded into the modern context where you see urine therapy represented as this kind of really well established ancient tradition where really like the threads in the tradition is kind of thin,
mhm.
but it's stood upon as if it's this great body of ancient wisdom,
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's,
there comes
and
my
then you
bias comes
found
back
that
in, but
piece too where it was like people were following a certain guru and they were like
yes,
feeling like his pee and poo were like these holy,
healing powers,
and we're
which
like
is
ingesting it, and
mhm,
yeah, it was like
that's
a cult
that's one of
style.
my red flags around like a lot of the adjacent world to urine therapy. There is a lot of this kind of like stuff that can register for me as cultish.
Mhm,
Yeah, like there is something inherently a very kind of powerful way of demonstrating a power hierarchy there
mhm,
that
mhm,
is essential to cult dynamics of
mhm,
saying, y I rule over your good senses. I have such power over you that I can dominate your thinking, your self-care, your sense of what's right and wrong. Like that is what cults are built on, and the
mhm.
idea of drinking somebody else's urine and eating somebody else's feces to me is like one
Oh,
of the
it's,
most perfect
yeah.
embodiments of cultish mentality where yeah, anyway, and maybe I was like I was mentioning earlier, I was like, I can almost buy into eating somebody else's feces as being therapeutic more than urine because we
Of
now
the,
know
yeah.
about like fecal microbiome transfers where, you
Cell
know,
transfers, yeah.
if you have severe dysbiosis and and you get a transfer of somebody's feces who doesn't have these digestive inflammatory conditions, you
Or
know, it's
Alzheimer's, it's being looked at. I mean, for a lot
yeah,
of yeah, in a very also, just to be very clear, I mean, we're talking about in kind of this loose way. Fecal transplant is, like, extremely controlled, like
extremely. It's going in the
yeah,
back end typically, and
or
you're
they
like
call it, like,
filtering
a
it for
poo-scription or something, like, you can take it orally, but it's not as
and
yeah.
typically it would be in an enterically capsulated,
Right. Very
product where
controlled,
it can
yeah.
get past the stomach acid. But,
Yeah.
you know, that's when I read that, I was like, I could almost buy that more, but, um, yeah, so
Right, like, if we're
that was an
talking in scale.
interesting yeah.
The other part that I think is interesting, it getting picked up in India and, like, in Thailand, this kind of happened where, you know, I can't remember the guy's name, like, was, like, kind of standing on, like, "We've been doing this in Thailand for, you know, like, generations," and the Thai health ministry was like, "No, we haven't, actually, there's no evidence of this." Um, one paper that I read is talking about how it's, like, it has become more popular and maybe is, like, one sort of like skewed solution in places with a lot of poverty, you know, so it's
Mhm,
like they're just like looking for solutions anywhere they can find them. And this is the thing that is so wild to me. And it's so up right now. I mean, right now in the United States, we're in this huge kind of like it is a tragic conundrum with our government, with health and human services, SNAP benefits for people, like food stamp benefits for people, healthcare subsidies for people who are going to look, you know, at having their healthcare costs like double if they're, you know,
mhm,
independent, getting insurance independently or off the marketplace. And it's like that there's like a poverty of healthcare in our country, you know? So it's like, okay, yeah, some countries, it's like poverty in all areas that
mhm,
have that as much in the United States, but we absolutely have this detriment in our ability to get healthcare. And what do you see? You see people turning wherever they can to get a
mhm,
solution to feel okay. And so in my mind, I'm like, it makes perfect sense that, you know, this like attractive enough grifter can go on Instagram, in my opinion. And I say this again, I do think most people, like, really believe in their heart of hearts that this is helping, right? Like,
mhm,
there are some people out there where word of mouth gets around, there's a little smoke, you think there's probably fire where there's smoke, that people are just, like, trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, but by and large, I think these people are, like, true believers, and then they get this huge group of followers because people are like, "Well, shit," what you know, it's like just as an example, like Andrew and I think maybe you and your partner also, do you all buy your own insurance? Like, we're looking at like $1,600 a month for like two extremely healthy adults. Like, we have no kids. So it's like, well, what do you do instead if you have no back to no history and trying to like figure it out yourself? You go online, you know? So,
mhm,
think there's a parallel there, not one that is as detrimental, I don't think, as people who are truly living in, like, third world conditions, but it's
mhm.
desperate here in ways for many people. Um,
It's
so
really, really important point, and it kind of falls in the same bucket to me of like, so I was looking at, well, um other mammals do this, you know,
yeah.
do other mammals drink their urine? Because that could tell us, like, is this an instinctual, um, you know, healing, protective thing at certain times, or is this really like a mental construct, right? Because if other mammals
Mhm.
are doing it, I think that would be an indication that there's something there to look at. And but what you find is like there are very few mammals that do it, and typically they're not like drinking urine on a kind of a regular basis. It's more driven by, like animals that like camels and other animals that live in extremely arid deserts where they may be having extreme dehydration, they may be having mineral deficiencies, and there's other things going on in the environment that's necessitating
Mhm.
their instinct to a lot of it you look at it as mainly like licking dried urine to capture some minerals,
Yeah.
or like you were saying, it can be a way to know what's going on hormonally in other animals in their community. So, like, picking up on
Yeah.
is somebody fertile or
Yeah,
not?
okay, so this is the thing. I have not thought about this in years, but when we were in Hawaii, we had goats. If you've ever been around goats, the male goat, like the stud goat with all of the females in the herd, when they were in heat, he was filthy and he would actually, if you didn't watch out, he would get you because he would like point his penis to his mouth and pee into like his mouth area, but it was
Wow.
only when they were fertile. And if
Uh-huh.
you were like around and you were in the wrong spot, you would get shot with goat pee, male goat pee, which is, look, like I said, I've done a lot of deconditioning work in my life. You do not want goat pee on your farm clothes.
Male goat pee.
Okay. It's like not the move. Um, and I haven't thought about that in years, but yeah, he would like spurt pee into his mouth and then like
Uh-huh.
go after the ladies. And I think it was like, it was part of, I haven't researched this as all. I'm just remembering this from living with goats. It was part of their like getting it on
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, so but this goes back to that narrative idea where this sounds really great, like, "Oh, other mammals do this." If you weren't digging down to understand that this is an adaptive,
Right.
usually a short-term strategic adaptive behavior that has some other, like, immediate survival advantage, it sounds great. So I would be out there being like, "Oh, yeah, all the other animals do this too, and that's how we know, right? And the French soldiers and whatever." But then you look at it and you're like, "Wait, does this actually mean that we should adopt this as a therapeutic
Right.
model for human wellness?"
Right.
Um, not
Especially if it's sick.
necessarily.
It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
being in a hard situation is a lot different than like, what would you do just on a normal morning when you wake up?
right. Which is going back to that piece too of, if you are starving,
Mhm.
you know, like going through a severe dehydration, don't have access to water, don't have access to other medicine, maybe there's something there. But
Yeah.
again, that doesn't translate into something that should be promoted as nature's greatest secret that they've been hiding from you. That's going to cure everything,
And
and that's
also
what
too,
happens.
like the point of narrative, this is the most fascinating thing I think about studying human health is that if we believe something, it works.
That's it.
Um,
Hmm.
so, we know that over and over and over. Um, I'm sure it's the same for pee. So, we can't rule out placebo when people are
Yeah.
using this and they have like a really like a true believer stance with it.
So should we get into some more of that research? Stem cells, all the different, let's like
Yeah. So,
give a good steel man to some of the
yeah, and I think there is like I have a little. I think my bias got chipped away a little bit because as I was reading through, I was like, maybe there is some topical application that's logical. So yeah, like you were saying, okay, NASA really looked deeply at what is in urine. Generally, it's mostly water, which I think most of us can kind of like gather. If you drink more water, your pee looks clear. It changes very quickly, and it is lots and lots of water. Urea, like you were saying, which is a byproduct of nitrogen, which we get from protein. That is our source of nitrogen in the human diet is from protein. Uric acid, which is a byproduct of purines. And I'm trying to think, I don't think purines, they're just in animal foods. I don't think purines exist in plant foods. And when I was like in my, hippie heyday, the people who were doing urine therapy, part of the narrative was you have to be on a vegetarian diet, which maybe was like why a lot of us weren't doing it because we were like these
interesting.
hardcore raw meat eaters. Um,
It
but
might
that
lower
was
the urea content so that you're less likely to get
Yeah, and definitely uric
urea.
acid, like so I do have experience with gout. I don't have experience with urine therapy, but I have given myself a little, temporary bout of gout at one point. I don't have to go into how I accomplished that. It was actually not even painful, it was pleasurable. My feet just got warm, which I liked. But yeah, it was a buildup of uric acid because I was eating tons of purine-rich foods. Creatinine is in pee. You're used to probably seeing that on your metabolic panel when you get your blood run. It's a kidney marker that that we look at in the blood, but it's also in the urine. And then, like you were saying, there's electrolytes, tons of salt. Pee apparently is really salty, phosphate, organic acids, just small amount of protein, mainly albumin, which is also present in the blood. It's a carrier protein in the body. So if you start to look at blood physiology, it carries um, the components in your blood, albumin and globulin, where they need to go. And then there's tiny, tiny amounts of antibodies, immune system, protein, and enzymes, which is ubiquitous in the body, a type of protein. And then depending on the person, right? I mean, I was thinking actually about people on like hormone replacement therapy. Those are excreted, the metabolites are excreted in the urine, but in they're very small amounts, glucose and then water soluble vitamins, which is like vitamin C, B vitamins. The one kind of traditional use that I didn't speak to is I had a friend that lived in India for years and studied a certain, like a particular form of Ayurveda. And they would actually take the urine and throw it on the ground to see if ants and other insects were
Mhm,
attracted to it,
mhm,
to kind of understand the glucose levels,
mhm.
and the
Now you hear that
metabolic
about, like, old
function.
nurses having to do that, tasting it to see if somebody was
Sweet urine.
mhm.
Um, so that is what is in pee. And there also are, I didn't see this in any other write up other than the specific research studies. There are urine derived stem cells. So there probably are other components in urine, but those are the main ones. So it's kind of like a salty water, mainly with these protein byproducts. And Amanda, I think you looked into like the urea part way more than I did, if you wanna speak to that.
Yeah, so, I'm not gonna claim to understand all of the, like, nitrogen cycle, that's involved with urea and uric acid metabolism, but one of the leading, so I watched a few, like, YouTube videos from, Ayurvedic practitioners and doctors who I was like, "Okay, this seems like it's gonna be, like, kind of the one of the more serious discussions on the therapeutic values here," and they were talking about, basically that because urea is, I think it has 2 molecules of nitrogen in it in a otherwise fairly small chemical group, so it's rich in
Okay.
nitrogen. And, their idea was, like, because there's all this nitrogen in the urea, and then that breaks down into ammonia, and then, their
Mhm.
their theory was that somehow the body would be able to capture that nitrogen, and when you slow down to try to, like, follow the chemical pathways, it was absolute word salad, kinda like I'm doing now, like, there wasn't any real, like, biochem there, but it was just that, okay, there's nitrogen in the urea. The body is going to be able to somehow capture that nitrogen and convert it into nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is an incredibly important compound for us physiologically, and we make it using nitric oxide synthase enzymes that are expressed in different tissues throughout the body. So, for example, in your blood vessels, you have endothelial nitric oxide synthase. It's this enzyme produced by the interior lining of your blood vessel, and it helps dilate the blood vessels, it keeps them flexible, does all sorts of immune signaling. It's really, really important, right, to manage blood pressure and blood flow and immune balance. And so, that sounds great, like, awesome, we're gonna be getting this new load of nitrogen, which, by the way, we get from plenty of other dietary sources. But the idea that, you could snort the urine and it would convert to nitric oxide in the sinuses, in the vascular system around the sinuses, and in the sinuses itself, and that could open, blood flow and help do things like clear infection and improve, nasal breathing and all of this stuff. The problem with this argument, though, is that if you do look up the actual biochemistry, as far as I can find, there is no known pathway by which the body can convert urea into nitric oxide. We create nitric oxide again from these nitric oxide synthase enzymes, and they have affinity for dietary nitrates, arginine. Like there's very specific chemical compounds they can use to create nitric oxide, and urea waste in urine is not one of those pathways. I think if it was, then we would be probably dumping less urea to begin with. So,
Right, because we would be
and
recycling
okay,
it.
so and the issue here is that not only is there no evidence that the body's gonna convert the nitrogen in urea into nitric oxide, there is evidence that urea actually inhibits, some of our nitric oxide synthase enzymes, so it could actually lower. So, it's just
So
another
wait, let's
great
read this though,
example
because
of
this is actually like where it comes from. When we eat protein from any source, um, protein itself, it's the macronutrient that has nitrogen. We've talked about this a little bit on the show. So carbohydrates and fats do not contain nitrogen, but proteins do. So we eat that protein, and then our body breaks that down into these different small amino acids, and then those amino acids are converted into ammonia, which is NH3, one nitrogen and three hydrogen, and that's toxic to the body. And so then in the liver, that ammonia is converted to urea, and then
urea,
urea passes to the kidneys and it's excreted from the urine. So that
and that can go
little
both way. Urea can also become ammonia.
ammonia, and actually, God, I shouldn't even say it. That's I don't have the papers pulled up to look at it, but yes, that can absolutely happen. You can see that occurring. Um, and so it was first isolated from the urine in the year 1773 by this French chemist. And I'm just looking to see if there are any other kind of, like tidbits that people would be interested in. That's the general like path of how we get urea. And then yeah, the like you're saying, the
So,
chemical
I might be
breakdown
missing
of
something, but
it just glitched a little. What were you saying?
I was just saying, I might be missing something where, I just don't think if you're eating, I just don't know that there is a missing pathway that I'm not seeing. Maybe there is where,
I mean,
urine
essentially
would
the
increase
question is
nitric
like,
oxide, but
can the body turn urea into nitric
mhm.
oxide?
Or you could look at uric acid too. Maybe that's, it's a much smaller fraction in urine, but maybe that's
I mean, it looks like, okay, this is interesting. Urea breaks down in the soil into ammonia, and then plants turn ammonia, like,
into
well,
nitrates.
plants, yeah, into nitrates. But
And that's what we can
yeah,
actually use to make nitric oxide.
so it looks like there's just this close connection between the two cycles. It's a separate process that uses arginine to create nitric oxide. So yeah,
And
it's
nitrates. Yeah.
yeah, nitrates.
It's just a
Um,
leap, it's just a leap, and it's one of those great places where it's like there's such a cool there's enough science there that if you're just looking at like a narrative, but using it to create a narrative, it sounds great, but then you interrogate it a little bit and it's like, oop, there's a link in the chain, in the logical chain or the biochemical chain here that
mhm.
isn't
It's
working.
yeah, it doesn't hold water. Um,
So that's nitrogen. That's one of the arguments, but I think stem cells we should maybe go back to because that's I think an
yeah,
interesting
that's
one.
a really interesting one. I mean, when you hear people online talk about using urine therapy, they're like, it has hormones, it has antibodies, it's like they're using these words. It's like science talk, like you're saying. And then when you start to look at it closely, you're like, wait a second. Like, first of all, does like oral ingestion of these urine antibody metabolites or hormone metabolites is that good for people? I don't know if there's any evidence of that, but there's all these kind of like very questionable parts of what people claim. But then also you hear them say like, oh, there are stem cells in urine, and they're like, stem cells are great, right? And they kind of are like, while they're like
Give me some.
taking their like fermented urine and like putting it all over their body and saying it's like sunscreen and all these things. So there are urine derived stem cells. There's a lot of research actually on them just because it is so easy to get them. And there are issues with like embryonic stem cells. There's, like ethical issues that people have. And then there are stem cells that are derived from bone marrow, which is actually like really difficult to get and painful. There's problems with all of these ways. Um,
Adipose, which is
yeah, or fat tissue, difficult to get, but pee, you just pee. And so, but kind of the main question, that comes up, and I really appreciated Amanda, like doing this research, and looking at your notes. It's like we kind of both came to this conclusion, which is like, are there stem cells enough in, let's say, just like a half a cup of pee to make a clinical difference. Um, and so like that's kind of what I was looking around for. And it looks like initially when in a lab they gather urine to get stem cells, they derive the stem cells from the urine and then they culture those, they make those stem cells grow. They like culture them and help them populate. Um so yeah, I did a little Google search. You did a Chat GPT search to try and figure out like how many
Mhm.
actually would be clinically meaningful. And then like the application, like if you drink it, is it going to
Mhm.
survive the acid in the stomach, which people should know is like extremely acidic and designed to kill off really everything that it touches to activate certain proteins to help us with protein digestion and to just like really clean the food that we eat. Would they be viable taken by mouth topically? I don't know. There are studies that we have pulled that we're going to put in the show notes that show that there are like skin healing properties to urine, but is it in the amounts that we would pee out, or would it have to be that the stem cells are, like go through this process of being reduced from the urine? Um,
Concentrated and then cultured basically to, like, set in a
yeah,
lab where they can go through mitosis and get a much higher,
it's a big question
dose.
mark. It's a huge question mark. And then this line was to me like one of the most interesting is because when you look on Instagram and you're watching these videos of these dudes, again, I kind of think like if the dude wasn't as like vital looking or kind of hot, like, and it was just some like, bro who was, just like the regular American guy that was like 20 pounds overweight with like a dad bod. And he's like outside, like putting the pee on him and being like, this makes me feel amazing. Would people be as excited? I kind of don't think so. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it's almost
Mhm.
like using the bombshell woman to sell the car. Um, but
Mhm.
part of their claim is like that fermented is better. And I heard this on a few different videos that like you need to ferment it. That's like a really important
Mhm.
part of it so that you're like as fragrant as possible. Yeah. So
Ooh.
that was kind of my question, is fermented better? So I was looking around at that. And actually, for the stem cells, um, this is a direct quote. Studies suggest that preserved 24-hour urine samples provide around 140 viable urine derived stem cells. Okay, that's cool.
24 hours. That's not
24
very
hours.
long. That's not 9
But
months.
then they say fresh urine offers a significantly higher yield of 3 to 7 urine derived stem cell clones per 100 milliliters. So
There is no reason to think that stem cells would persist or be amplified sitting around at room temperature on your shelf being exposed to God knows what, because these are coming
oxygen and
out of the
yeah,
kidneys, whatever's in the urine, like, they just happen to be in the urine. Cells don't It's just like cells are living cells, right? Stem cells are living cells. Why would they be amplified?
well, they're not. So,
They're not. Yeah,
according
so there you go.
yeah, so and it's a study in the journal Cell. It's, we're not just like pulling this off of Wikipedia.
It's
We'll
just
link
not.
that study in the show notes that so if you do want to experiment with your urine and the stem cells that are in your urine, fermenting it is maybe not as good of a move as using it fresh,
I mean,
according to this.
if what you're sorry to jump in. If what you're doing is like a topical application and the effect that you're getting is actually maybe from ammonia, then that would make sense that aged would be better because more of that urea is gonna be broken down into ammonia, which is gonna have different
So is
effects.
your theory that the ammonia, once it's, because look, you can smell. Okay, so for instance, if you've gone out of town and forgotten to flush the toilet and you come home and you're like, oh shit, and you smell it, it smells like ammonia. It's
Yeah.
broken back down to ammonia. So is your theory that the ammonia would like kill off maybe like bacteria or something that's on the skin and then
Yes.
yeah,
Or,
yeah,
like, when they talk about using it for teeth whitening, I think ammonia can I don't understand really the chemistry of ammonia, but I know it's an
cleaner. It's a
effective
cleaner.
cleaner,
Yeah,
and so
totally.
I just think that that may be a big part of what, is,
Maybe they should
is
be using it to, like, mop their floors, like, this is actually a misappropriation, they should be over on, like, clean
Yeah,
talk instead of health talk.
or put a cup in your laundry to boost the whites.
Like borax, it's the new borax.
Yeah. Or
Um,
you could do alternatives. Throw a little hydrogen peroxide in.
yeah, yeah, so the stem cell, claim, I mean, it's true, and, it kinda comes back to this, there's this, these repeating themes on the show where it's like, even though something is true, does it actually matter in the real
Mhm.
world? So something may exist, it may improve or like that, but, like, how much does it improve? Is it really gonna,
Mhm.
like, change?
Does Is it enough?
Um,
Does it adhere? Does it do the job? So one of my favorite analogies is like if you need a new roof, you're trying to rebuild your roof, it's damaged, it's breaking down, you can order shingles and put them in your garage. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those shingles are then going to be assembled into a new roof. Like you have to have the
right.
roof assembly. And the same is true with like I'm taking collagen to, so this comes up for me with my husband who has connective tissue disorders. It's like if we give him
Mhm,
collagen, then can he rebuild collagen better? Well, the
mhm,
enzymes that actually rebuild the roof are, they're the issue. So,
mhm.
yes, we can provide more precursors, and that's a good idea just to maximize the ability of those enzymes to work, but it's still not, it's not the same. Dumping the shingles in the garage is not the same as actually getting them on the roof
Building
and
the roof,
rebuilding it. And I
yeah,
think that's the true with stem cells. When they're naturally produced and put out into the body, there's signaling, that can happen to attract those stem cells to areas where they're needed. um, I just wonder when you just kind of like are randomly applying them to different tissues, you don't really can't always know what's going to happen. So a really
mhm.
great example of this is I just think the word stem cells has this has a
Huge
miraculous
connotation.
halo around it,
Yeah,
right? It's like
yeah,
the fountain of youth. It's like a chance at a new, new tissue. Wow. But
yeah.
we have to step back and be like, well, there's different things that could grow, and can we control that process? I have
Mhm,
a history of neck injuries, and I had a big upset a couple years ago with a disc that is, I have a flattened disc and a big bone spur, and I was having radial nerve pain down my left arm because that bone spur was sitting down on the nerve feeding my left arm because the disc had been flattened, right? So that
mhm.
space. So I was looking into stem cell therapy, like, can they just inject that disc with some stem cells and help me regrow my disc a little bit? And there are people that will do that for you and tell you that it is the fountain of youth. But if you get into their research, it's not yet recommended because those stem cells, they can't control, like,
Mhm.
they can come back out of that little area that they injected it into to the surrounding tissue, land on that bone spur, and grow the bone spur rather than the
Mhm.
disc.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that, it's just this idea of like, there's so many more questions to ask before we just
Mhm.
assume that, okay, there's stem cells. Wonderful. I'm in. Give me some. Right. It's like,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's just not that quite that simple. But I understand that like stem cells, enough said. I'm in. Let's do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Sounds
Yeah, it
great.
totally, I think about, right, like Brian Johnson, we did an episode on him, the guy, who takes like 400 supplements a day and is trying to live to be, like maximal human lifespan, and this, who I'm talking about, he's got that whole line of supplements and like that, like popularity through like watching him on this Netflix documentary going to get, these kind of like experimental injections. Even he's like flying to this island, outside of the US to get it because it's not legal yet in the United States. Like there are so many therapies ranging from thousands and thousands of dollars to what just comes out of your urethra. Where this is the thing that, and I actually thought about this morning. I'm like, there are these different paths to learning about the human body and interventions that we can use if we need it.
Hmm.
And we kind of get like put into our little, funnel, right? It's like conventional, holistic, people go to TikTok University to learn. There's like all these different ways of learning, and we kind of get like siloed into our little way. And then it's like, those are the solutions that we use.
Hmm.
It's like hard for us to look outside of our silo or to think like in a more like encompassing way, which is, I think, what we're trying to do on this podcast is like get rid of the silos, look around, see what's most effective, which is why we discuss our biases so that we can more effectively do that and be really transparent with the people who are listening that, yeah, just like every human, we come in with stuff. And it's like, I don't know, I guess in my mind, I'm really out for like what is the best. Is it stem cells? Is it what is it statin drugs? Like we talked to John O'Connor, like what is the thing? So when I'm like thinking about this, I'm trying to think about it through that lens. And I'm
Mhm.
just like, for a problem that you would have, or even to optimize a healthy body, do we have enough information to think that urine therapy would fill either of those roles, like for a specific disease or issue, or for like biohacking? And I just don't see it. I think
Mhm.
that's where I don't have like a huge bias one way or the other. I'm like, yeah, I don't like the way it smells necessarily, but like, okay, whatever. It
The
just doesn't
taste.
seem like we have a lot of evidence other than kind of N=1 people on social media saying that it's effective, or these extremely specific circumstances in traditional medicines. It's
Mhm.
kind of it's a wash. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm kind
and
of
it's
like,
that
"Meh."
whole, like, I think about that with its antimicrobial properties of, like, well, it may have some antimicrobial properties. Pretty much every fluid, in the human body does. Like, we are one big antimicrobial machine in a way. That's our immune system
Mhm.
trying to keep us from just rotting on the spot and being
Yeah.
decomposed, you know?
People don't
Like,
understand, right? Yeah. Well, people do
but
who have immune dysregulation or like, really extreme genetic immune problems, they get it. But yeah.
But
Yeah.
but in general, I would say that's true, but does that mean that, like, urine is your best option if you're looking for a topical antimicrobial? Even if you want to stay completely natural, you may be able to find something that's, like, a lot more
Just
effective
brew some
and
lavender tea.
much more delicious or just enjoyable. Like, you don't have to use it. I think
Or
that
for hormones, or it's like, okay, like go get your estrogen, or go get your whatever. It's also not the like active hormone. It's a hormone metabolite that is in urine.
yeah.
Okay. And here's also a point that we haven't even touched on that I like came to me as we were talking earlier. And I think it's really important to touch on. And you put this in our show notes. People have been so conditioned to think about detox as like the liver. That's kind of what we think of with, or fasting, which is like such a myth, right? Fasting is not a detoxification strategy. It's not bad, but it is certainly not a detoxification strategy. So we think about the liver. The reality is that, yeah, the liver is a major organ of detoxification. And the main path, the primary path that we use to get rid of most of the nastiest shit in us is the kidneys, right?
Yeah.
It's important that we poo, for sure. Like our microbiome has phase 3 detoxification properties. That is part of the story. But the really crazy stuff, and the majority, comes through the kidneys and out of the urine, right? So
Yeah.
nobody I've found, either people who study biotransformation and they study the release of toxicants in the urine, they are certainly discussing this in research papers. But nobody talking about urine therapy is talking about the fact that our kidneys and bladder and urine are major detoxification organs. So
Yeah, so okay, so
like,
I grabbed a couple of comments off of YouTube around this topic because I think it's such an important example of how, even if the primary influencer is well intended, we get this kind of groupthink mentality. And
mhm.
really, what ends up happening sometimes is like community members are even more of
Oh,
the
totally.
influencer, right? So let me just read you a
Yeah, yeah,
couple of
yeah.
these comments, right? So this was a urine therapy YouTube video, and somebody in the comments, somebody who was thinking said, what about if someone is heavy metal toxic? Wouldn't they be recycling the metals back into their system? Their response, which gets a lot of applause, is 99% of toxins are removed in the liver before reaching the kidneys, exclamation mark. A small amount of any toxins ingested through your own urine stimulate the immune system response.
Sort of like thimerosal in a vaccine.
Right.
I'm sorry.
But it's just like, just look up excretion of mercury or
Yeah.
mercury metabolism and elimination. It's going to be in the urine.
Yeah.
And then another person says, isn't the urine getting rid of toxins? Would we want to recycle that back in the body? So then everybody jumps in. Think of urine more as a receipt of what's in your body, proof that a substance is or was in your body, but not the actual substance. Metabolites or metabolic ash is what that's called. Okay. The only time your urine shouldn't be used is if your kidneys don't work or if you have an infection like a UTI. I would argue that if your kidneys are working, then they're going to be pulling things like mercury and ammonia
You
or
might be
urea out.
safer if your kidneys aren't working as well.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. And then another person says, we all grew up in a bag of urine in our mother's womb. I've been on and off of it since 2017. And when I am off of it, or when I'm on it, I feel the best and look the best. Wait, when I'm on it, I feel and look the best I could and have ever felt. Um, Okay, this is my favorite one. It's not
Yeah.
waste, it's excess. It's what your blood doesn't need at that moment. Medicine and babies come out the front, waste comes out the back. It's amazing medicine made just for you, by you. Your body is highly intelligent. A
Yeah.
beautiful,
Story. It's a
hopeful
great story.
story.
Yeah.
Um, but we don't need to drink our urine to believe that our bodies are constantly working in our best interest and highly intelligent. There's a leap there, and I just want to say, with the mother's womb, that's another beautiful thought.
Story. Yeah.
But what's happening there is, yes, the baby is drinking amniotic fluid and urinating out that fluid continually. But the amniotic fluid, that crosses back across the placenta into the mother's bloodstream, where her kidneys
Yeah.
capture waste and urinate it out. So it's not like
Mhm.
you're in just some infinite pool of urine. You're still, cleansing and excreting that urine as waste. The mother is, for the infant,
Yeah, and
for the
I
fetus.
mean, it actually would be amazing to have a whole episode. It would be much more like it wouldn't be as, like, influency, it would just be more like a direct health kind of episode on the placenta because people don't realize,
Mhm.
like, what an incredible organ that is.
Mhm.
It is its own organ that we grow. Yeah, I mean, God,
I
Amanda, it is such
Yeah.
a you said this, and it's true. It's such a perfect topic for this podcast because I think the narrative component, it is so strong. And it's like what, I'm a marketer. It is how you market because people make decisions based off their emotion, not off
And
the facts.
And the social proof here in the comments is so
Huge.
powerful. So you show up to this group and you're brave enough to step up and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't totally making sense to
Yeah.
me. Like, shouldn't we be thinking about that? And then you just get this like dog pile of true believers coming in, trying to
Mhm.
negate that critical thinking. And wow, that to me feels like such a stronger level of influence in some ways.
You've made it I've never thought about that. I don't think we've ever said that on this podcast where, like, the followers turn into a more powerful influencer than the actual influencer,
Yeah,
and it's
your peer group.
totally true. Like, I really see that heavily in the carnivore community where, yeah, whatever, Paul Saladino, and I can never remember the, like, carnivore doctor's name. He's not as, well known as Paul Saladino, but he's extremely committed to the carnivore diet. Um, their followers they're fanatics. They've gone past fan into fanatics and yeah, are stronger influencing than the actual person. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of think like takeaway. Yeah, there's other options. Like if you are literally when you're like stuck between a rock and a hard place, I think about like being out in the wilderness and something happens and you don't have access to water. It's like, okay, yeah, in an emergency. But
You'll
otherwise, like
probably
put a
survive it.
couple drops of lavender oil in some water and take a bath. You will have antimicrobial. Or if you need hormones, there are all kinds of ways to get hormone replacement therapy if that, it's like it's just not even like in a physiologically significant amount. I guess I don't know, the reasons why stem cells like it just doesn't land for me
Mhm.
at all. And then yeah, if you do have exposure, I mean, God, Amanda, what I think about is like I know you're super familiar with this area of the world, like living in Northern California where all that gold mining happened, and tons of people have exposure to those metals. And then there's this like huge hippie community. It's actually where I encountered like the most like ardent urine therapy dude I've ever been around. I'm like, what was he being re-exposed to over and over and over?
Mhm. I think there's a piece that comes up for me in this that, we tend to distrust science as this kind of man-made, a synthetic, reductionist thing that we need to return to the garden, that we need to return to
Mhm.
this beautiful innate intelligence and wisdom, and you know those don't need to be separated like that.
Yeah.
This idea of like, actually, we are nature and we are evolution, and we have developed this level of inquiry and scientific method as part of nature. Like,
Mhm.
we're still nature
Mhm.
is us. And so um, science can be the celebration of the natural world and the affirmation of natural intelligence. So
Mhm.
if you're like in a community that's divorcing the two, and pushing extremes, then
Pay
it's a
attention.
good time to pay attention to that.
Totally. I think there's a way, Amanda, where people think that because there is this is my belief. There is like a terrible influence from insurance companies or from pharmaceutical
Yeah,
companies or the way that some studies are run. Like that does happen. That means it's like people throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's like, well, then all of it is bad. And it's like,
yeah.
wait a second. You can deduce, like you can think through and try to see your own biases so that you can see, like, okay, what maybe actually is helpful or is true. Same on the other side. It's like you can't just blindly accept everything in the natural world. You'll end up drinking your pee. And we have. I think part of the reason that, as you're talking, I'm like, you're so fit for this podcast because we've really gone down that road so far and been like, oh, actually, it goes to the exact same place of like absolute, blindness and kind of like getting sucked in as people go when they go down the conventional road. It's like you can get extreme in both areas and you can totally get taken for a ride in both areas. So the key is like
Mhm,
do your best to kind of parse out like what is the most helpful and not put yourself in that silo.
mhm,
And yeah, it takes a little bit of work and it isn't as fun. That's the part that's, it's like this podcast is kind of fun because I would love to like make critical thinking fun. But like how much fun is it just to like be like this is my ballpark and I'm just going to hang out in it and like like lather tallow on myself and drink pee and or to feel really safe and like I'm going to take my prescription drugs and go to the doctor and just not think about, like these crazy people over here talking about, that pee drinking is a terrible example, but saying that like maybe there's ways to use proteolytic enzymes to take care of. I just read a paper about this taking proteolytic enzymes to address floaters in the
hmm,
eyes, and there's actually really good evidence that that works. Um, so
that's
yeah,
cool.
the separation is it's holding us back. It's really holding us back. Okay, anything else on urine therapy that we want to?
No, I think we're good. I think we got it pretty good. I'm happy with where we landed.
Well,
I'm glad you could rein in my bias a little bit.
I think I mean, look, I don't want to do it, but I don't have as strong. I'm just like, ugh. But
I think the point of like it's free and accessible. If you do it minimally, you're unlikely to cause harm. Don't go to extremes.
yeah, don't
And
not go see a doctor though if something is wrong, or go,
exactly.
a doctor that is gonna like take you seriously and not just kind of brush you off. It's I know doctor is a covers a lot of different people, but don't do that and just drink pee instead. That's
And there are
important.
so many very natural built-in healing mechanisms that we can access without, having to drink urine. Like if you want more nitric oxide, go work out.
Eat some beets.
Eat some
Delicious.
beets. Yeah, work out. So there, it's you can still be in that lane, and again, just not have to go to quite the extremes. But some people need help. They're not well, so I get it.
Yeah.
We're all searching.
Okay. It was great talking to you. This
You
was
too.
excellent. Fun as always.